Hi guys, what's up? It's Alex here, and today we're going to be doing a preview of the 2013 Chinese Grand Prix. Now, sorry, I've got a bit of a cold, so I might not sound completely the same as I normally do, but I'm going to try my best to get through this commentary and make it entertaining. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting Grand Prix, the third race of the season, and at the moment, Sebastian Vettel leads the championship. Been there or thereabouts. It hasn't really been car. We've obviously seen that it is much better than last year's car, and we can see that the way that Ferrari can evolve a car over the season, maybe not as much as Red Bull, but they can definitely develop a car, and I'd expect Ferrari to be there or thereabouts, like I said with McLaren, but I'd expect If he gets the setup right, he is going to be right up there. Crazy Grand Prix I've ever seen from a team. They just had probably the worst pit stops I've ever seen. They had some sort of problems in the pit. I think it was with the wheel gun or something with the wheel nut, meaning they couldn't They've had a pretty decent start to the season. In Australia, it was a very great race for Bianchi. Bianchi was only like a hundredth of a second behind Vettel's fastest lap time in Australia, and they also showed some really good pace in Malaysia. And I think Jules Bianchi is the man you want to look out for, because I think out of all of the new teams, or the two new teams, he is going to be the guy to score the first point. He is lightning fast. I think now personally he deserved a much better seat for this year, because now we can see what he can do in the Marussia. I think Jules Bianchi is the guy to look out for this year, and definitely next year he's going to be on fire if he doesn't get a bad seat, if he doesn't get a good seat, because he definitely deserves a good seat. And yeah, Marussia, they're going to be right at the end of the points, I think, this year. I think they might be able to maybe get close to the points here in China. We'll see, but it's definitely going to be a good race for them. But yeah, thank you for watching this video, guys. I appreciate it. If you do like this video, you can leave a like on it. That would be awesome. And if you want to share this out with friends, that would be awesome too. And if you haven't subscribed already, you can subscribe. But yeah, thank you for watching, guys. I appreciate it. I really like doing these race previews, and I love putting out the karting footage in the background. Lots of people enjoy it, so I like doing it too, because go-karting's fun, and I like recording it and uploading it. So thank you for watching, guys. I appreciate it. I'll see you in the next video. It's been Alex and Matthew. Goodbye.